Level 1, Soldat. You are 22 years old. You don't choose the date. In April 2014, you're finishing a mechanical engineering course in Dnipro when the news from Slavyansk starts filling every screen in the student common room. And by May, your name is on a mobilization list at the local recruitment office, called up as part of the wave sent to reinforce a defense line that barely existed 6 weeks earlier. Training lasts 11 days at a base outside Zhytomyr, less than anyone would have wanted and more than the schedule allowed for. You're issued an AK-74 with a stock held together by a strip of tape someone applied before you were born, body armor a size too large, and a set of instructions from a sergeant who fought in Afghanistan as a conscript 30 years earlier and clearly can't believe he's teaching this course again. Your unit is trucked east to a position outside Debaltseve. You sleep in a dugout the first night, in the uniform you arrived in, because there's no time to build anything better before the shelling starts at 4 a.m. and doesn't fully stop until well past dark. You learn the sound of incoming before you learn most of your squad mates' full names. Rations are whatever the supply column manages to bring up the road that week, often less than the manifest says, because the road itself is contested more nights than not. By the third week, hunger has stopped registering as anything unusual. It's simply the baseline. Every evening, your section commander, a former miner named Vitaly, who's older than everyone else in the dugout by a decade, goes over the day. A jam that cost someone 3 seconds too long, a position given up too easily, a runner who took a route he shouldn't have. You learn quickly that naming a small mistake yourself, before Vitaly finds it, costs you less than being caught not mentioning it. You admit to losing track of your ammunition count during a firefight, true enough to be credible, small enough not to follow you. After 6 weeks, holding and losing and retaking the same stretch of road near the rail junction, your platoon is pulled back for rotation. A single chevron goes on your sleeve, awarded almost as an afterthought by a company commander who has bigger problems than paperwork. You are, for the first time, a soldier who has been tested under fire and is still standing. And you already understand that staying that way will mean learning exactly what to say about a bad day and what to leave inside it. Level 2, Starshyi Soldat. You are 23 years old. The front settles into something the news starts calling a ceasefire, though nobody holding a position near Avdiivka or Pisky would use that word without irony. You spend most of 2015 through 2016 rotating through positions along a line that moves only in small, brutal increments, learning the geography of a stretch of Donbas you never expected to know this intimately. You're paired for a joint listening post assignment with a soldier from a mortar unit. Ole, 24, from a town near Kharkiv. He talks the way people talk when the alternative feels worse, steadily, about nothing much, until the nothing slips into something real. During a quiet stretch one night, he mentions that his mother's apartment building lost its heating contract that winter, and she's been splitting firewood at 61 because the district can't get gas lines repaired fast enough. He says it, looking out at the tree line, not at you. Back at the position, in the incident log every soldier is expected to keep on morale and readiness within their section, you write something brief and careful. Minor personal stressor, family utilities, monitoring, no operational impact. You choose the wording the way you'd choose a foothold on unstable ground, not because Ole's comment is dangerous exactly, but because an offhand remark about home, entered badly into an official log, can turn into something a tired command staff reads the wrong way on the wrong day, and you'd rather it just stay small. Nothing comes of it either way. You never find out if your phrasing mattered or if it was never going to be an issue regardless. That uncertainty becomes something you just carry, the way you carry the rest of what doesn't get resolved out here. Your platoon commander's quarterly note on you uses one word: steady. In a war that runs on rotations and attrition more than dramatic victories, steady isn't a small compliment. It means you've understood, correctly, what's actually being asked of you day to day. Level 3, Molodshyi Sergeant. You are 24 years old. You're given command of an 8-man section, most of them younger than you, several of them recent volunteers who signed up after watching the same news footage you once did. You check their rifles. You check that their aid kits are stocked and that everyone actually knows how to use a tourniquet correctly, because a soldier who freezes on that lesson costs the whole section more than himself. At the nightly debrief now, you don't sit with the section, reporting on yourself first. You stand back and watch. You learn to notice who's gone quiet in a way that isn't just tiredness, who volunteers for extra watch shifts because sleep has stopped coming easily, who started writing more letters home than usual. These are the signs your company's medic and your commander are both watching for, and you find yourself catching them a beat before either does. One of your soldiers, Danilo, 19, from a farming village near Poltava, has been slipping. Small lapses in focus, a hesitation before responding to orders that wasn't there a month ago. Your company commander, a former history teacher everyone calls Batko for reasons nobody explains to new arrivals, pulls you aside after the third incident and asks what you've observed. You describe Danilo as solid under direct fire, but wearing down under the grinding stretches between engagements. And you recommend rotating him to a rear logistics task for 2 weeks, rather than flagging him for a formal fitness review that could follow him. Batko agrees. Danilo comes back from 2 weeks running supply runs, looking more like himself. You never learn whether your framing genuinely protected him from a review that might have ended his service, or whether it simply solved Batko's immediate problem, while keeping your section's readiness numbers clean on paper. The two things don't separate out here, and you've stopped expecting them to. At the end of the rotation, your file carries one word from Batko: dependable. In this war, no word in a soldier's record does more work, and none asks more of you going forward. Level 4, Serzhant. You are 25 years old. February 2022 arrives, and the war you'd spent 8 years learning to live inside becomes overnight a different war entirely. Your unit, redeployed north of Kyiv in the war's opening weeks, holds a position near Irpin through fighting more intense than anything Donbas prepared you for. In terrain you were never trained to defend at this scale. You're promoted in the field, on paper confirmed weeks later once the front stabilizes, and placed in charge of coordinating between your platoon and a territorial defense unit made up largely of civilians 3 weeks into their first uniform. Your job now includes weekly coordination with the battalion's logistics officer, a woman named Katerina, who spent her civilian life running a freight company and now applies the same relentless practicality to keeping ammunition and medical supplies moving under conditions that make both nearly impossible some weeks. The meetings show you a machinery invisible from a section leader's position. How much of this war runs on decisions about what can be resupplied versus what has to be defended with what's already on hand. Decisions that get made fast, under pressure, and that someone has to own afterward. Every request from a forward position passes through an unspoken filter. Is this the position that gets the next shipment, or does that position? And what happens to the one that doesn't? After your first coordination meeting with Katerina, your company commander tells you privately that you'll learn, with time, which shortages to escalate loudly and which to manage quietly within your own section, so morale doesn't collapse under the weight of what everyone already knows. You already know. You learned it watching Danilo wear down and recover, watching Ole talk about his mother's firewood. What's different now is the scale, and the fact that your name is on requisition forms that outlast the moment you filled them out. Level 5, Starshyi Serzhant. You are 26 years old. 8 years in. By the autumn of 2022, you've been through Kyiv, back to the east for the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and now hold a position near Bakhmut that will, over the following months, become one of the longest and costliest fights of the entire war. You command a platoon-equivalent element of 34 soldiers, some career military, most volunteers, a handful barely out of their teens. On a night in December, moving a wounded soldier back from a forward position under artillery fire, one of your newest men, a 19-year-old, Ivan, who joined in the war's first week, takes shrapnel crossing open ground that the evacuation route requires. He survives the crossing. Your combat medic, 23 years old herself and running on almost no sleep for 4 days straight, does everything the position's limited supplies allow. You log it. Name, time, wound, evacuation status, in the record every unit keeps, mostly for the families who will eventually need to know. The next morning, your battalion commander, going over losses across the sector, asks whether that particular route should have been used given the artillery pattern from the previous 2 nights. Every officer in the briefing looks toward you, since the route was your call. You explain the alternative routes considered, the timing window that made this one the only viable option before dawn, the artillery data available to you at the time. He nods, makes no further comment, and the briefing moves on to the next sector. Nothing follows immediately, but the question, raised once in front of the assembled section leaders, doesn't vanish because nothing came of it that morning. It becomes something several people in that room now quietly associate with your name.
Your battalion's after-action note on your platoon's conduct that month reads simply, decisions consistent with available information. Not commendation, not criticism. A statement of fact that leaves the weight of it entirely with you.
Level 6, Starshyna. You're 27 years old. You're pulled back from the line for the first extended rotation you've had in over a year, reassigned to a training and coordination role at a base near Dnipro, responsible for integrating new mobilized soldiers into units that have already lost, by this point, more people than most of them will ever be told the real number of. Your role now puts you in regular contact with a brigade staff officer, Major Soldat, whose job is balancing what units at the front are requesting against what the brigade can actually justify sending, given ammunition allocations that never quite match what any single sector believes it needs. Every training decision, how long new arrivals spend on live fire drills before deployment, how much is triage versus thoroughness, runs through the same unspoken math. How much time can be spent making someone ready against how badly the line they're heading to needs another body. One young instructor under your supervision, a former physical education teacher named Pavlo, who trained soldiers in the war's first chaotic months, has started pushing back openly in staff meetings, arguing recruits are being sent forward undertrained and that the brigade's timelines are the direct cause of preventable losses. He isn't wrong, and everyone in the room, including Soldat, seems to know it. But the pushback doesn't change the timeline. It just changes how much weight Pavlo's opinion carries in the room afterward, and how much less he's consulted on decisions he clearly still cares about. You watch this and understand, without anyone explaining it directly, that being right in this war and being heard are not reliably the same thing, and that the distance between them is one more weight every officer here learns to carry without much ceremony. When it's your turn to raise concerns, you learn to frame them as logistics problems with proposed solutions rather than as grievances, because problems with solutions get acted on, and grievances, however true, mostly get noted. Level 7, Molodshyi Lieutenant. You are 28 years old. You're commissioned through an accelerated officer course, a pathway created out of necessity as the war stretches into its third year of full-scale fighting, and the Army needs experienced NCOs converted into officers faster than any peacetime academy could produce them. You attend 6 intensive weeks, combining tactics, casualty minimization planning, and the increasingly central skill of managing morale across units that have been fighting in various configurations since childhood friends were still alive to fight beside them. One officer candidate in your cohort, a former IT engineer named Artem, who mobilized in the war's first days, delivers a tactical assessment during a training exercise with more confidence than the exercise called for, overriding a more cautious plan from the instructing cadre, insisting his read of the terrain was self-evidently correct. He turns out to be right about the terrain. He's wrong about how that certainty lands with an instructing staff that has watched confidence like his get soldiers killed in the war's early months, before caution became doctrine rather than instinct. His subsequent assessments get quieter, more hedged, more careful to leave room for input he once would have dismissed. When your own assessment is reviewed, the instructor's note is short, sound, appropriately cautious, communicates well under disagreement. You understand, watching Artem recalibrate over those 6 weeks, that competence in this war has to travel with restraint to be trusted with more responsibility, because the war has already taught everyone above you exactly how expensive unrestrained confidence can be. Level 8, Lieutenant. You are 29 years old. You command a platoon of 36 soldiers holding a defensive sector near Avdiivka's outskirts, ground fought over in different configurations since 2014, now unrecognizable from any version of it you first saw a decade earlier. Your name appears now on documents that travel to brigade and occasionally to operational command level, sector readiness assessments, casualty projections, resupply justifications, each one a fixed record someone above you can revisit whenever the sector's outcome demands an explanation. This spring, your sector undergoes a review by an inspection team from operational command, evaluating ammunition discipline, fortification standards, and rotation scheduling across the brigade. On the 4th day,
An inspector flags a discrepancy between your reported entrenchment progress and satellite imagery showing slower work than logged. It's not falsification. The work was delayed by 2 days of sustained shelling that made surface movement lethal, but the gap exists in the paperwork regardless, and paperwork is what travels up the chain, not the shelling that explains it.
You provide the incident reports, documenting the delay, cross-referenced against casualty logs from those same 2 days. The inspector notes it, accepts the explanation, and the review moves on. The sector passes. But discrepancy noted, explanation accepted, is now a permanent line in a file that will outlive the conversation that resolved it, available to anyone who later needs a data point rather than a story. You spend the following weeks tightening your own reporting discipline, not from fear exactly, but from a clearer understanding of how thin the line is between an explainable delay under fire and a data point that looks, on paper alone, like something else. Level 9, Kapitan. You are 30 years old. You take command of a company, roughly 110 soldiers, within a brigade that has by now been reconstituted twice from the unit you first mobilized into back in 2014. Most of the men you served beside in that first summer are gone, rotated to other units, wounded out of service, or not alive to compare notes with anymore. You attend brigade-level planning sessions, where the subjects have shifted from immediate tactical questions to something heavier: sustainability, manpower projections, how long a company like yours can keep absorbing losses and remain the company it's supposed to be. At one planning session, a fellow company commander's seat is empty. Captain Bondarenko, who led a company through some of the worst of the Bakhmut fighting, isn't present, and the meeting proceeds without comment. You learn afterward, through the informal channel that carries this kind of news faster than any official one does, that he was rotated out following a medical evaluation. Nobody discusses directly the accumulated weight of 18 months at the front, finally registering as something the chain of command had to act on, whether or not he agreed with the decision himself. You think about Ivan crossing open ground on a December night 2 years earlier. You think about Danilo, worn thin by a war that never seemed to end, even during its quiet stretches. You think about Pavlo, right about the training timelines and unheard anyway. Every departure you've watched up close in this war was rarely about failure in any simple sense. It was about a weight finally becoming visible to someone with the authority to notice it at a moment that wasn't chosen by the person carrying it. At the next planning session, you watch your own reporting a little more carefully, not hiding what the war has cost you exactly, but understanding now how closely that cost is being tracked by people whose job is deciding how much more any one soldier, including you, can reasonably be asked to carry. Level 10, Major. You are 31 years old. 11 years since a mobilization order first found you at 22. You're promoted to battalion staff, coordinating operations across 4 companies along a sector that has held, broken, and been retaken more times than the official history will ever fully record. The war, by now, has become the only adult life you can clearly remember having. And the peacetime version of yourself, the one finishing an engineering course in Dnipro, feels less like a memory than a story you've heard about someone else. A younger officer under your command, a lieutenant barely into her 20s, commissioned through the same accelerated pathway you once were, falls into step beside you one evening as you walk the perimeter of a rear position during a rare quiet stretch. She asks what, after everything, actually separates the officers who hold together from the ones who don't. You think about it longer than she probably expects. What you tell her is that it's knowing which weight to carry alone and which to hand up the chain before it becomes too heavy to carry at all, not to avoid responsibility, but because a company commander who tries to hold everything himself eventually has nothing left to give the soldiers who actually need him to be steady. She nods and doesn't write it down, because there's no notebook out here for a lesson like that one. What you don't tell her, because 11 years hasn't given you words for it yet, and might never, is that you no longer fully remember who you were before you learned it, and that some nights, walking a perimeter that looks almost exactly like 100 other perimeters you've walked since 2014, that's the loss that sits with you longest. Not any single thing the war took, but the slow, complete way it became the only shape your life still knows how to hold.